Hello, this is Meredith, and I'd like to welcome you to my new channel, Marvelous French, which I've created for those who are studying French or who are interested in learning French. So I'm excited to present to you my first video, which is a part of a series that I'm calling Closer Look. So as a part of Closer Look, I'll take clips from French movies, French TV shows, portions of French songs, and just discuss interesting grammar points, vocabulary, and expressions. Now, I will be focusing on single grammar points, single bits of vocabulary in separate videos, but in Closer Look, we'll really just be looking at an overview of several different grammar and vocabulary points. Now, in this first episode of Closer Look, we'll be looking at a French TV show, a sitcom from the 90s called Hélène et les Garçons, Helen and the Boys. Now, if you'd like to watch the first episode, I've included a link to the video on YouTube, which includes French subtitles. So feel free to check out the first episode and then come back here. Now, today we're just going to focus on really basically the first two pieces of dialogue. So this is part one of what will be a series. So Hélène et les Garçons focuses on 6 college students, 3 guys, 3 girls, and in the opening scene of the first episode, the 3 guys are in a cafeteria chatting. So let's take a look at the first line. Et vous voyez, ce que je trouve vraiment génial à la fac, c'est qu'on peut sécher les cours quand on veut. Personne ne demande des comptes. And let's take a look at my attempt at an English translation. You see, what I find really great about college is that you can skip class whenever you want. No one will hold you accountable. So now let's take a closer look at the dialogue. So, A is just sort of the equivalent of our hey, H-E-Y. It doesn't have a lot of meaning. Now, as for vous, that means you. And in French, there are 2 ways to say you. There's vous, which is used here, the plural you. And there's tu, which is the informal singular. Now, vous can be plural, which is the case here. You have one student talking to 2 of his friends. It can also be used formally if you want to be polite or respectful, whether you're talking to one person singular or several people plural. Tu is informal singular, so you're talking to one person that you know well. It's casual. Okay. So if the student in this dialogue were just speaking to one of his friends, he would use tu. But because he's speaking to 2, we have vous. Now, voyez comes from the verb voir, which means to see. So vous voyez, you see. And just as in English, you see can be literal. Vous voyez les filles. You see those girls there. Or it could be figurative, as it is in this case. It just kind of means, you know. Next, we have ce que je trouve vraiment génial à la fac, what I really find great about college. Now, ce que is interesting. We translate that as what I find truly great. Now, in this case, it's what we call the indefinite relative pronoun, and relative pronouns link 2 phrases. In this case, ce que is linking je trouve vraiment génial à la fac, and c'est qu'on peut sécher les cours quand on veut. And I'm not going to go too far into detail because it's rather tricky, but one thing that is interesting is that the word what in English actually has several possible translations in French. So let's take a closer look at that. So in green, we see a list of several words that can all be translated as what. Ce que, which we've already seen. Ce qui, que, qu'est-ce que, qu'est-ce qui, quel, quoi. So these can all be translated as what, and which one you use really depends on the role that what plays in a given sentence. So I just have some example sentences here. First example, que faites-vous? Or another way to ask the same question, qu'est-ce que vous faites? So I've put the words that can be translated as what in all caps. So in this case we have que or qu'est-ce que. They are question words, what's called interrogative pronouns. So when you have the question word what and you're using it as the object in a sentence, you're doing what? That calls for que or qu'est-ce que. So when you're asking a question with que, you have que followed by your verb, a hyphen, and then your subject. It's called inversion. Que faites-vous? Or you can use qu'est-ce que followed by your subject and the verb. Second sentence. Qu'est-ce qui se passe? What's happening? What's going on? So qu'est-ce qui is another question word that also translates as what. Now, in this case, unlike que and qu'est-ce que, instead of acting as the object, it's acting as the subject as a sentence. So when you have what as a question word, acting as the subject, that gives you qu'est-ce qui. Third example here, quel est ton numéro de téléphone? What's your telephone number? Now, in this case, we do have what. It's being used as a question word, and it is a subject, but this is almost a special case, a particular structure, when you want to specifically say what is or what are. So what followed by to be, that actually calls for quel plus être. Quel est or quels sont, what are. So if you want to ask questions like, what's your favorite color? What are your 3 top pet peeves? That would call for quel with être. Now the last 2 example sentences use ce que, again, which is a relative pronoun that links 2 phrases. So we have je fais ce que je veux. I do what I want. Okay? So ce que links je fais, I do, with I want, je veux. And a quick note as far as pronunciation, a lot of times instead of ce que, we just say ce que. We run it together. Second sentence there, ce n'est pas ce que nous avons dit. That's not what we said. So again, ce que links ce n'est pas, that's not, with nous avons dit, we said. So now let's go back to our dialogue. Okay, so we talked about ce que, which means what here. Then we have je, which means I. Trouve, which comes from the verb trouver, to find. Vraiment, truly or really. Génial is informal. It means great. And à la fac. Now, la fac is an interesting word. That is short for la faculté. So let's take a closer look at that. So la faculté looks a little like our English word faculty, which usually refers to teachers, professors who work at a university. However, in standard French, la faculté does not have that meaning. Rather, it can refer to a school or a department in a university. So here are some examples. La fac d'anglais would be the English department. La fac de droit would be law school. La fac de lettres would be the School of Arts. Now, la faculté, or la fac for short, can also be slang for just college. Now, the official word for college in French is l'université, looks like university, but also it can be referred to as la fac. Now, I just wanted to briefly mention the fact that in English, a lot of times we say college, at least American English. In French, there is a similar looking word, le collège, but actually this refers to our equivalent of middle school or junior high school. So it does not refer to university. So basically, if we want to say our equivalent of college is l'université, or for short, la fac. On the other hand, if you hear le collège in French, that's referring to middle school or junior high school. So now let's go back to our dialogue. So we have c'est qu'on peut sécher les cours quand on veut. C'est meaning it is. This QU here is actually short for QUE. And then we have our apostrophe ON. Now, que, QUE in this case, would actually translate to that. Now, we saw up above, ce, what, and we said que by itself can also mean what. But que is pretty flexible, and in this particular sentence, it translates as that. Now, let's talk a little bit about the fact that que, when followed by a vowel, gets truncated to QU apostrophe. So que, and also other short words that end in E, like le, or sometimes A, like la, when followed by a vowel, gets contracted to QU apostrophe. Now this is called elision, and this is something that happens for pronunciation reasons. So let's take a look at an example sentence. C'est vrai qu'il ne parle pas anglais? Is it true that he doesn't speak English? So here we have QU apostrophe IL. That's short for QUE space IL. Now if I read it that way, c'est vrai que il, that's choppy. And French really is all about flow. Everything should flow as if it's just one word. So again, when we have words like que that end in E followed by a vowel, you get your QU apostrophe. Now let's go back to our dialogue. So that brings us up to on, which is an interesting word. On can be translated as one, as in one does not simply walk into Mordor. Had to get a Lord of the Rings reference in there. But a lot of times in English, one sounds a little stilted, so instead we might say you, the general you. You don't just walk into Mordor. Or sometimes the general they. They speak Spanish in Spain. So that's one possibility for on. On can also mean we, W-E. Now traditionally, nous, N-O-U-S, means we, and in this case, on and nous are interchangeable. They both mean we. So let's take a closer look at on with a few example sentences. On mange beaucoup de pain en France. Literally, one eats a lot of bread in France, but we'd probably say they eat a lot of bread in France. So on, in this case, is the general they. Second sentence. C'est frustrant. On ne sait jamais ce qui va se passer. It's frustrating. One never knows what's going to happen. Or we could say, you never know what's going to happen. So on, in this case, is the general you. Now in the third sentence, on va aller voir un film demain soir. On means we. We're going to see a movie tomorrow night. Okay, and we know this just from context. So in this case, on va could be replaced with nous allons. Nous allons aller voir un film demain soir. Okay. Now, another note about on, as far as conjugation, it is considered the third person singular, the same conjugation that you use with il or elle, he or she. So we see here mange, on mange, il mange, elle mange, on sait, right? No, on sait, il sait, elle sait, et on va, same conjugation as you would use it with il or elle, il va, elle va. So now let's go back to our dialogue. So that brings us to peut, which comes from the verb pouvoir, which means to be able to. So on peut, one can or we can, sécher les cours. Now sécher literally means to dry. Sécher les cours is an expression that means to cut class. Les cours referring to the classes. So let's take a brief look at sécher. So again, sécher literally means to dry. Here are two example sentences. J'utilise une serviette pour sécher la vaisselle. I use a towel to dry the dishes. Or le linge est en train de sécher. The laundry is in the process of drying, or the laundry is drying. So sécher in French, like in English, can be used transitively. That is, you can dry something, or intransitively, something can become dry itself. But sécher les cours is an expression that means to cut class, skip school, ditch, play hooky, and that's how it's used in this dialogue. Speaking of which, let's head back. So we had sécher les cours, which is to cut class, and then quand on veut, quand meaning when, again the on, which means one or you or we. Veut comes from the verb vouloir, which means to want, so when we want, whenever you want. Okay. Now one thing I wanted to say here is a little bit about the structure that we have here. Ce que je trouve vraiment génial à la fac, what I find really great about college, it's that you can skip classes whenever you want. So this structure is very common in French. You're kind of setting things up. Well, what I find really interesting or great is, okay, now let's take a closer look at that kind of structure. So I'm calling it self-referential, but we can say that emphasis is often used in French. There's a certain amount of redundancy. So I have some example sentences here. C'est mon ami, which means, oh, that's my friend. It's also very common to say, ça, c'est mon ami. Oh, that's my friend. Or, c'est mon ami, ça. That's my friend, that. Okay, so it's sort of redundant, it's sort of emphasizing, but it's a very common way to say things in French. A second example, j'aime la pizza. I like pizza. I can say moi, j'aime la pizza. Me, I like pizza. Where moi here is sort of emphasizing je. Okay. I can also say j'aime la pizza, moi. It's very common. Another example here, ce que j'aime vraiment, c'est la pizza. What I really like, it's pizza. So it's sort of a redundant way to express the idea, but you will see that this kind of general structure is very common in French. And with that in mind, let's head back to our dialogue. Ta-da! We finally made it to the final sentence, the final portion of this one sentence. We have personne ne demande des comptes. Now, personne ne here together means nobody or no one is used as the subject of the sentence. So once again, let's take a brief closer look at that. So again, personne ne at the beginning of a sentence translates to nobody or no one when it's the subject of the sentence. So I have an example here. Personne ne m'aime. Nobody loves me. Oh, sad face. Okay. Now we can do the same thing with rien, which means nothing. Rien ne. As the subject, rien n'est important. Nothing's important. Another sad face. Now we see here we're using our in apostrophe, another example of elision. We're taking ne followed by a vowel and shortening it to in apostrophe. Now the thing about personne and rien is that they are also negations. So sometimes we want to use them actually as objects instead of it being the subject. Nobody loves me. Maybe I don't love anyone. So in that case, we're going to take ne personne and wrap it around our verb. For example, je ne connais personne means I don't know anyone. Okay, in this case, je is actually the subject and personne or anyone is the object. So we have je ne connais personne. We can also do that with rien. I don't know anything. We take ne rien and wrap it around our verb. Je ne sais rien. I don't know anything. So basically when we want to use nobody or nothing as the subject, personne ne, rien ne, when they're being used as the object, then we take ne personne ou ne rien and wrap it around the verb. Now let's head back to our dialogue. So the final piece here is our demande des comptes. Now, demande des comptes is an expression that means to hold someone accountable. So we're basically saying no one will hold you accountable. No one's going to hunt up after you. You can do what you want, and no one's going to be monitoring you. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this first sentence. Now let's take a brief look at the second sentence. So the second sentence here, c'est ça. Sauf à la fin de l'année, quand on passe les examens. Let's take a look at what that looks like in English. So here's the English translation. Sure, except at the end of the year when you take exams. Okay. So c'est ça literally means it's that. But really it means, yeah, that's right, sure, Sauf, except, à la fin, at the end, de, of, l'année, meaning the year. We see elision here. The L apostrophe is short for la, the, feminine. But because it's followed by a vowel, it's going to get shortened to L apostrophe. L'année. Quand, which again is when. On, which again is you or we. And passe les examens. So in this case, passe les examens does not mean to pass tests, but actually to take tests or exams. Now let's take a closer look at that. So passer un examen is actually to take a test. It tells you nothing about the results. Now to pass a test in French is réussir un examen. And réussir means to succeed, or in this case to pass when it refers to a test. To fail a test, échouer à un examen, or rater un examen. So échouer à means to fail at something, échouer à quelque chose. Or more informally, we can use rater for referring to tests. Now, rater can also mean to miss, as in to miss a bus. So if I say, j'ai raté le bus, I missed the bus. Now, another quick pronunciation note on this word here, examen. En a lot of times gives us a nasal sound, en, but this is an exception. This sounds like almost like in or ain, an examen. And there we have it. So let's go ahead and go back to our little dialogue. Okay, all this time on really just 2 sentences. So I think that's going to be it for now. But before we go, I'd like to just actually have a little quick quiz just to see if you retained a little bit of what we went over. So how do we say to take a test in French? Voilà, passer un examen. Now what about to cut class? How do we say that in French? Sécher les cours. Now a final question. Sécher? What's the literal meaning of sécher in English? Sécher literally means to dry. And there we go. That's the end of our simple little quiz. So again, this is Marvelous French, and that was a closer look. And à la prochaine. See you next time.